Yeah, most
But
famous
see, that's what
people
you've got.
I've met.
That's what you've got to look forward to, Emilio.
I
Is you
know, just those random encounters with famous people. You know, the most famous people I've met would be you and Representative Doherty, but that's it.
We'll have to change that, Emilio.
Yeah, hopefully after the pandemic, I'll start running into famous people left and right.
Mr. Nullup, will you let us know when we're ready to go?
Okay, Mr. Mayor, let's give it a go. You're set to go.
All right, I will call this City Council meeting to order. City Recorder Krager, please call roll.
Councillor Goodhouse.
Here.
Councillor Newton.
Here.
Council President Lube.
Here.
Councillor Shaw.
Here.
Mayor Snyder.
Here.
Youth Councillor Calderon.
Here.
All right. Mr. Nulp, would you mind putting the flag up? And I'd ask everybody to mute and participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nullup. Councillor, staff, any non-agenda items?
None for us, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, City Manager. Let's move on to public comment. Written public comment was due earlier today by 4:30 p.m. I believe we received one piece of written public comment that was related to a public hearing later in the meeting. City Recorder Krager, was there any other general written comments that were not related to a public hearing?
No, Mr. Mayor. We received one related to agenda item 5 and then a second piece that I sent later related to the same public hearing.
Okay. So I'll make sure that every member of the council receives those. Make sure you've got those as we get to item number 5 on the agenda. And we'll move on. Next item on the agenda is public comment by phone. Anyone that wishes to may call 503-966-4101 and call in at this time. Callers for agenda items 5 and 6 should call in at the beginning of those public hearings. Mr. Nullup, do we have any callers in the queue now?
Mr. Mayor, at this point in time, we do not have any callers in the queue.
Okay. Follow-up to previous public comment. Assistant City Manager Nyland, is there any follow-up to previous public comment?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. We have no follow-up this evening regarding previous comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda, which is used for routine items, including minutes and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements. Information on each item is available on the city's website. In the packet for this meeting, these items may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion. Council members may request that an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action. And tonight on the consent agenda is considering a resolution number 21-08, approving Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue Fire Code Ordinance 20-01. And I believe that is the only item on the consent agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. City recorders, please conduct a roll call vote.
Councillor Goodhouse,
Yes.
Councillor Newton,
Yes.
Council President Lube,
Yes.
Councillor Shaw,
Yes.
Mayor Snyder,
Yes. All right, the consent agenda is adopted unanimously. Thank you. We will move on to introduction of our new Metro Councillor, Garrett Rosenthal. I saw him earlier, and let's see, make sure I've got him on my screen. Mr. Rosenthal, thank you for coming to join us this evening. And I understand you want to have a conversation, get to know the council and the new city manager, and just have a kind of a working dialogue. If is that still what you were hoping to accomplish?
That's what I was hoping to accomplish. I don't have any hard resolutions that I want to address, but being sort of the new kid on the block, I'd like to meet you all and get to know stuff. As you know, I've talked to Mayor Snyder a couple times over the course of the last 6 months, actually once in person, actually, so about a year ago. But I'm trying to keep track. You know, there's 7 cities in District 3, and I want to keep track of all of them. I don't swear allegiance to any city, but I do want to represent all your interests and try and understand your problems and do what I can to make Metro a servant of the local jurisdictions to the extent possible. So anything you have, I'd happy to hear any questions you have or any complaints you might have about Metro. Complaints are actually better than praise because they are the food for change.
Well, I will thank you right off the bat. I know the last conversation we had, I had shared kind of a little bit of a frustration that we hadn't gotten a reply on a particular thing, and within 12 hours we had a reply. Thank you, Councillor Rosenthal.
You're welcome. I won't guarantee 12 hours. It's not like a pizza delivery. I don't think I can guarantee that all the time, but I'm glad that they responded. To be very honest, when I mentioned it, they said, "Oh my God, we haven't done anything on this." And I go, "Yeah, you haven't." And then they said, "Okay, we'll do it."
Hey, you got it done where others had not. So I give you some credit there. Let's go, for the benefit of Councillor Rosenthal, why don't we do introductions, and if you've got any particular issues or points that you want him to be aware of, we're going to use this a little bit as a working session. So let's start. Councillor Newton, do you mind starting?
I don't. I'm happy to start. I'm Councillor Liz Newton, and I don't know how much you know about my background, but I'm retired. I retired from a 37-year career with the city of Tigard in 2017, and I ran for council in 2018. I've lived in Tigard for about coming up on 18 years. So my background is as a land use planner. I was a planner for the city for a while, so I have sort of a planner interest, a little bit more depth in some of the like transportation issues and the affordable housing plan, just sort of for Tigard, how those are going to play out in terms of policies and things like that. So the planner in me wants to go to, how that's really going to come to fruition in Tigard, and the parks too. So those are things that are of particular interest to me. I'm Also wondering what we're going to do with regard to the Southwest Corridor and transportation improvements in general, since we weren't successful there. So without going into great detail, those are things I follow. I'm really happy that our senior center housing project got the $1.2 million grant from the CDBG Policy Advisory Board. That's great. So yeah, those are things that I just follow because that's my background and I'm interested. So I will leave it to the other counselors, and if I think of something else, I'll raise my hand. Thanks.
Councillor Rosenthal, do you have any follow-ups to Councillor Newton or any questions for given what she had said?
Well, the only thing I'd say is that, of course, all the development going on in King City and Tigard, River Terrace, and the King City areas, we have a lot of work to do for regional transportation to try and get those people to places they need to go. And so I'm very supportive of efforts to move forward as quickly as possible, particularly on Highway 99. The Southwest Corridor is another big issue. That's a little bit more debatable from some standpoints, but getting people from these livable areas that you're going to have them, that you're building homes for, to places that they want to go is going to be a big challenge. And 99 needs work.
Good to hear you say that. Youth Councillor Calderon, do you want to go next?
Yes, so I am Youth City Councillor Calderon. I serve a one-year term that ends at the end of June. As for my background, as you can tell, I'm quite young and don't have a specialty, so I can't exactly say anything about that, but I would agree with Councillor Newton's comments, especially with the parks and transportation around our new housing areas and just overall development. But if I think of anything else, I'll make sure to speak up or email you.
I'm glad that his specialty, Councillor Rosenthal, in my opinion, is representing the youth and students in our community, and he does that very well. Sorry to interrupt.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I meant to say, I'm also glad that the housing project in Tigard is moving forward.
Councillor Goodhouse.
Councillor Goodhouse, lifelong resident of Tigard. Been on the council now 6 or 7 years. Been active in the community. And kind of echoing everyone else said, as far as the parks, Highway 99, what's going to happen with Southwest Corridor, the River Terrace area expanding out there, and then just how some of the implementation and future tax measures will happen and go through Metro is always kind of a, going forward, and having a coalition between the citizens and businesses is always important to make sure that both parties are involved, and it's something that works for both parties in future measures.
Okay, great.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor, and Councillor Rosenthal. It's a pleasure to have been recently elected. Matter of fact, our signs were near each other in many different areas of Tigard. So congratulations.
Congratulations to you too.
Thank you. And to echo, obviously, some of the comments have been already made. Transportation is going to be key, particularly with Southwest Corridor. We really need to look for innovative and creative solutions. You mentioned 99, so thank you. Also, I think transportation electrification, how do we make sure we have green transportation and housing? And then how do we ensure that we can grow to the next level that Tigard's poised to grow? So looking forward to working with you, looking forward to working with Metro and under the leadership of both our council president and mayor. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great.
Council President Lube.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Councillor Rosenthal, we really appreciate you reaching out to the city and getting to know us. My name is Heidi Lube. I'm the council president. I was appointed to the council in 2019 and I ran in 2020, so I was elected with Councillor Shaw. And so I'm excited to have another 4 years. I actually just hit my 5-year anniversary of being in Tigard this week, so I was pretty excited about that when that came up. So still somewhat new to Tigard. I think I would echo a lot of what everyone says, concerned about how we grow in a smart way out in the River Terrace area and have the transportation infrastructure there and the support system to be able to get our community members where they need to go, and having multiple different ways to get there. Not everybody wants to get in a car, and I think we need to be able to provide those alternate transportation ways for everyone to get around safely. I would also say parks are really important to our community members. I think COVID has brought out just how important and vital those outdoor spaces are, especially as we continue to become more dense in the city limits. Those green spaces become even more valuable. So just making sure that we have the space for them is really important. And the trail connectivity between all of our regions is incredibly important to allow people to get around. And also the affordable housing, just making sure that our region is continuously providing opportunities so a variety of people in different situations can live and work here and thrive here. So those are the things that are really important to me.
Yeah, I just want to comment that, of course, the housing initiative and supportive housing services are two very big issues. And admittedly, I was not there, but Metro took on a very big challenge to make these work. And, we're going to sink or swim, and I hope we swim. And with the help of the cities, I think we will do so. It's interesting that so far the three projects that are the furthest along are all in District 3. There's the Beaverton one, there's your one, and then there's one other one. I can't remember exactly where it is. But Metro is doing right now, so far, we're on track to build almost 1.5 times as many housing units with the money that we originally had planned in the bond issue. So things are looking good at the moment. So if we can keep on track and provide that housing, and then maybe try to lobby the federal government to do a little bit more investing in housing, which they haven't done very much of, maybe we can solve this problem. And then the supportive housing services, that's going to depend on everybody and your local organizations. Metro's going to try and sort of keep an oversight, but we don't have the boots on the ground expertise to actually do all of that. That's going to come in your local cities, whether it's your city council or your nonprofits. And so it's a big challenge. We have a lot of work to do. The good news is that we should be having vaccines for everybody by the end of May now, with the new Johnson & Johnson coming out.
So, Councillor Rosenthal, the only thing I would add, and you started to kind of touch on it, is, and this is a more general comment, but it's specific, for example, to the supportive services measure, and really making sure, and what I want to impart in you kind of as a new Metro councillor is how important it is.
Locked out. Could you repeat that? I lost you for a second.
Okay, is my audio okay now?
It sounds good now, yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure that, and it's really critical from our perspective, and really from all of the jurisdictions in Washington County's perspective, that when those regional measures get passed, that each jurisdiction is receiving the services in some form in or around their communities. We've got a number of, I would say, and Tigard and Tualatin and Sherwood really are challenged. I think you and I talked
again. Darn it.
Oh. Are others having trouble hearing me? No. Okay. So, Councillor Rosenthal.
I've been having troubles with my laptop. It seems to have some chip malfunction.
Okay. Well, and we can talk about this later. I just want to make sure you know that it's important that for the communities that are in East Washington County in particular, that are very far from Hillsborough, that it's critical that services like the supportive services measure, that those resources make it to places where our community members can access them. So
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I will try and do that.
Yeah, and that's one example of it, but you'll see that theme come up over and over with some of the large packages that are, passed and then supposed to be distributed, and Metro seems to be in that business lately, and that's okay, but we got to make sure they get where they need to go and into the specific communities they need to serve. So,
as I'm sure you can understand, one of the issues that still is not completely resolved is exactly who's in the driver's seat when it comes to housing and supportive services. Was it the county or is it the metro? And let's just say there's some nuances there that haven't been fully resolved.
Absolutely. Other comments or questions from council members or from Councillor Rosenthal? Do you need anything from us specifically beyond what we've shared tonight?
No, I don't think so, unless you have particular solid waste issues with the proposed July changes. I don't know how your city fares on that. It's been an issue in Sherwood and Wilsonville and Tualatin to some extent.
Council want to share any perspective on that? I know we were kind of waiting to.
I do have a question, actually.
Okay. Go ahead.
I assume that the potential site out in Cornelius doesn't affect Tigard very much because it's pretty far away. But what would Tigard think about more reliable, more frequent, shall we say, household hazardous waste or styrofoam collection locations? Things that could be a little bit more predictable. Is that something Tigard would support?
Well, I think, I mean, the way you just proposed that, I would say that's a pretty simple yes, but, you know, I guess I would ask, does it come with a cost?
I think everything comes with a, I don't know I'm sure it comes with a cost. I don't know whether it's a big cost or, I mean, keep in mind, Metro already has some household hazardous waste and special collection episodes or situations. And I haven't had conversations, but I've heard from I heard from Beaverton today that this is one of the issues that plagues people. Small households don't have a place to go very easily ever since your Far West recycling disappeared.
Yeah, no, I would say it's an issue. And I guess if we're being asked to give an opinion about the value of it, it's hard to do that without knowing what it would cost. But it's certainly having closer access for any kinds of services is generally more desirable. It's just a question of, again, how much it costs. I don't know if others want to weigh in more, but I would have to know both to give an opinion.
I have a comment on that one with Councillor Rosenthal. We do have Agilex in our backyard in Tigard that does recycle the styrofoam and turns that into jet fuel. And they are, last time I did a tour, and I think some of us other council members might have done a tour along with Representative Doherty. They're looking for a way to have a collection process to get that, a way where maybe people get on the curbside, deliver it, and somehow those haulers drop it off to them so they can recycle that styrofoam and along with different plastic parts. There's a whole line of products they have. They just need to have some kind of a method or contract or way that haulers can pick it up and people can leave them on their curbside that can get to them. So that might be something to look at along that discussion.
Yeah, it brings up some interesting issues of franchise rights and things like that I don't know the answer to. That and also reminds me, if it could be arranged sometime, I would love to have a tour of the Agilex facility because I think you have something very interesting there. I've heard about it, but I don't. It doesn't reach down to my neighborhood, unfortunately.
It's quite a thing to see. Yeah, you kind of have to go there. Like there are a lot of people in Tigard who just drive their polystyrene to them and leave it. So you're welcome to do that too. It's open 24/7 to just sort of chuck it in there as long as you only leave stuff that is supposed to be left. Council President Lube?
Yeah, I would say it's, for Tigard residents, I think we're very lucky to just be able to drop all of that off very easily in our backyard. My household has done that. If we're talking about just sort of waste services in general, I would say the one request that we have had more often than not is composting services. So that's something that, our residents really would like access to. And I know it's up to the haulers to sort of, figure that out, but they need a reliable facility that they can take it to. And so composting is something that, is very much on our residents' minds.
Okay, that's good to know. I still haven't figured out the entire complex relationship between Metro and the various haulers and the various facilities. It's a very complex relationship. I'm learning, but thank you.
All right. Well, Councillor Rosenthal, thank you for your time. I'm going to move us on to our next item on the agenda, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Thanks.
Cheers.
All right, we will move on to item number 5 on our agenda, which is a legislative public hearing considering an ordinance adopting Tigard Municipal Code Chapter 5.24 related to transportation network company policy. I will open the public hearing. Anyone that wishes to testify may do so by calling in on the phone and getting in the queue. You can do so by calling 503-966-4101. Again, 503-966-4101. Transportation Planner Roth, staff report, please.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Dave Roth, Senior Transportation Planner with the City of Tigard. I'm here tonight to present an ordinance for your consideration that would place regulations on transportation network companies operating in the City of Tigard, which would adopt a new Tigard Municipal Code Chapter 5.24 related to the TNC policy. Sorry, could you clarify, are you opening it to public comment right now, or would you like me to start my presentation?
No, I announced that there will be public testimony, but that comes after your staff report.
Oh, good. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, I've got a presentation that Mike is going to help me advance slides on here. So thanks, Mike, for getting this up and running. So before I begin, I'd like to thank and acknowledge all of our stakeholders that participated in a constructive dialogue around this work, including Anna Richter-Taylor, representing Uber, and Sam Cho with Lyft, our City Attorney Shelby Rahala, and Mark Williams and Eric Hesse from the Portland Bureau of Transportation. I think Mark is here joining us tonight to help answer any questions that you might have. Next slide. So again, we've got a ordinance for your consideration. Shall City Council implement a new Tigard TNC policy? The ordinance would adopt Tigard Municipal Code Chapter 5.24 related to the policy. Next slide. So a little bit of policy context around the ordinance today and the policy. So just speaking in terms of our strategic plan, it was adopted again in late 2020 and provides specific guidance and actions all designed to result in a more accessible, equitable, and walkable community. Several of the actions contained within the strategic plan support the proposed policy and regulations before you tonight, and I have a few examples on the screen there. Next slide, please. So what is a TNC? Transportation network companies, or TNCs, use the digital network or smartphone app to connect passengers to drivers, providing prearranged rides, typically in a car owned by the driver. Uber and Lyft are the dominant TNC companies in the Portland metro region. State and local governments around the country regulate rideshare companies for a number of reasons, including public safety, traffic, and emissions monitoring and management. Most local government regulations focus on safety. Cities set standards for vehicle safety and driver conduct to ensure that TNCs are operating safely in the community. Eugene, Springfield, Ashland, Medford, Gresham, and Portland are among Oregon cities that already have regulations and fees on TNCs. Next slide. So the City of Portland has regulated TNCs since 2014. Their private for hire transportation program aims to provide for the safe, fair, and efficient operation of private for hire transportation services such as TNCs. Under the program, the city collects 50 cents for every ride to pay for programming and regulations, including vehicle safety inspections, driver background checks, driver education and training, and to support the PDX Wave accessible dial-a-ride program. Portland's regulatory framework requires TNC companies to have specific insurance, zero-tolerance drug and non-discrimination policies, an app with customer instructions requesting a wheelchair-accessible vehicle, if needed, and to conduct background reviews on drivers. On the slide here, you'll see a local news report on results of an audit of Portland's program between 2014 and 2019. During this time period, PBOT inspectors suspended or revoked 168 Uber or Lyft drivers' permits because of criminal or driving history violations, all of which Uber or Lyft had not caught themselves during routine background checks. Next slide. So the ordinance before you today would set standards for vehicle safety and driver conduct to ensure that TNCs are operating safely in Tigard. For one, it prevents unsafe drivers from operating in Tigard. Tigard would receive criminal background checks and driving history reviews of Uber and Lyft drivers. A driver would not be permitted to operate here if they have a violent felony conviction, sex offense, or recent traffic crime convictions, including driving under the influence or leaving the scene of a traffic injury. The bill requires companies to have zero tolerance policies and drug and alcohol use for drivers on the job. Next, it ensures that safe vehicles are operating in Tigard. It requires vehicles to display company logos, to have passed ASE safety inspections, and to have properly functioning horns, lights, and signals. And finally, it enhances equity for riders. TNCs would be required to accept requests for service from any location within the city, including requests made by persons with disabilities and requests for wheelchair accessible service. It also requires that the companies have zero tolerance policies for discrimination. In addition to these standards, regulating TNCs will give Tigard's traffic engineers, transportation planners, and policymakers access to information about the number of TNC trips and location of those trips in Tigard. Such information will give the organization a more complete understanding of the impacts this emerging technology is having on Tigard's transportation system. Next slide. So I'd like to take a moment to emphasize that the proposal before you today is part of a larger collaborative effort. Tigard would join Gresham, who just passed their own TNC policy in partnership with Portland. At the moment, at least 4 other cities are considering joining the regional effort, and others will probably come aboard in time. Under this proposed ordinance, PBOT would administer most aspects of our regulatory program. Portland has a sophisticated team of administrators and several years of experience with these regulations. Their private for hire program team is accustomed to managing new driver data, automatically issuing permits, and reviewing driver background checks. Rather than build our own unique program, our proposal leverages Portland's existing rules and regulatory framework through a partnership approach. This approach has multiple benefits, including the ability to enact the new policy and ordinance with minimal time and resources on Tigard's side. We could develop our own program, however, it would be a significant investment of resources across the organization, and it would potentially lead to differences in programs and rules within the region, which is something that TNCs have said they're not in favor of. It would create a seamless system for TNC drivers in the Portland metro region. The proposed ordinance and arrangement aligns with Portland's existing rules and regulations, giving TNC drivers one regional point of contact for permit issuance. Creating a seamless system and set of rules and regulations for TNC companies. With the proposed policy and agreement, TNC companies will continue to interface directly with PBOT, who will manage the administration of the policy and associated regulations. Next slide. So under the proposed policy, every trip originating in Tigard is subject to a 50-cent fee. This is identical to the existing 50-cent fee PBOT already collects for every trip that originates in Portland. PBOT would retain a percentage of the fee collected in Tigard to support administration and management of the TNC regulatory structure as it pertains to TNC companies and drivers in Tigard. The remainder of the funds from the fee would support service areas impacted by the operation of TNCs or involved in the regulation and administration of the TNC policy. And the specific service areas we're talking about are limited to transportation related areas. We're talking about transportation planning, engineering, public safety, code enforcement, and so on and so forth. To be more specific, revenue will fund administration of the regulatory program. Tigard would enter into an IGA with PBOT for administration of the program, and a portion of the fee would go back to PBOT for this administration. It would fund our own expenses associated with administering the program. Beyond what PBOT administers, a portion of the work may remain in Tigard. For example, appeals from Tigard drivers whose permits may have been revoked might be handled in Tigard. It would support city functions that are impacted by TNC's use of Tigard's roads and right-of-ways. Uber and Lyft's business models rely on the use of roads that the city of Tigard builds, maintains, and regulates. These rides contribute to the wear and tear of Tigard's roads. Therefore, funds collected beyond those used to administer the adopted regulations can be used to support relevant service areas, including, as I mentioned before, transportation, engineering and planning, code enforcement, and public safety. Next slide. One more. There you go. So that ends my presentation and staff report. And I will open it up for discussion and Q&A.
So Dave, I just need to, I know you're not involved probably in a lot of public hearings, but we actually can't do discussion now. It can be questions of you. We'll need to move to our discussion after I close the public hearing and after we've had public testimony. So just to clarify and direct the council, if you have questions of staff now, that would be appropriate, but not discussion. Any questions? Council President Lube.
Yeah, thank you, Senior Planner Roth. Will this be going into its own fund, or is it going to go into a currently existing fund, and how will it be tracked?
That's a good question. I believe probably the best way to manage this would be to set up a separate fund that follows the rules outlined in the code itself.
Do we have any estimates on how much we think this is going to raise based on the amount that we'll, after we pay the 15% to PBOT?
Because we're unable to see the number of trips or know the number of trips that are happening in Tigard, it's impossible for us to say for sure. We anticipate it's a fairly modest amount, and particularly under COVID conditions, the usage of TNCs has dropped significantly. So starting out, it would be quite modest, but over time, with growth of TNC use, it could increase.
Okay. My last question is, with Gresham just recently implementing this, have we reached out to them based on their experience and any feedback they have?
I spoke with their staff back in December. I've not followed up since then, so I can't report back on their experience setting up an IGA with Portland for their specific program.
Okay. And then I have one question to ask, but it's based off of the written testimony. Should I wait to ask that? I don't want to break the rules.
Yeah. So Council President Lube, it's a question of staff that's based on the testimony.
And I will wait.
Well, no, I was just thinking through it. I think it should wait.
Okay.
City Attorney Rahala, is that? I guess I'll look for your coaching on that for me.
Yeah, I don't have a strong preference either way. I think it probably makes the most sense to hear all the public testimony and then address questions all at once.
Okay.
Then those are the only questions I have. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dave, for an excellent report. Appreciate the information. if this ordinance is passed, when would it be implemented? And President Lube actually asked my question about if the account would be dedicated. It sounds like it would to transportation, and I probably missed that detail, and I apologize for when it would be.
Councillor Shaw, I also want to just check. I know you had given me a heads up, and you're now participating in the questions and comment. Are you intending to abstain from this discussion and vote?
Thank you, Mayor. No, I've investigated. There is no potential conflict, but thank you for raising that issue.
Awesome. Okay, sorry. Go, Dave. Go ahead with the answers.
So on the fund question, yes, it would be a dedicated fund for the revenue specific to the ordinance, limited to the items in the ordinance, and then it would be it would come online 30 days after adoption.
Other questions of staff? All right. Thank you, Mr. Roth. Don't go far. I'm sure we'll have further questions for you. We're going to move on to public testimony. We received public testimony from Anna Richter-Taylor representing Uber, and I want to make sure everybody saw that. That was an email dated March 1st. So that's one piece of written testimony, and then the other was an email that I think went to Senior Planner Roth last week that was forwarded earlier this afternoon. Did everybody receive that one? That was from Sam Cho at Lyft. Okay. So we've got both of those pieces of written testimony in the record and reviewed by the council. We did not receive any other written testimony that I'm aware of. Mr. Nolup, are there any callers in the queue?
Mr. Mayor, I do have 2 callers in the queue that may match your written public testimony. So I will let the first caller into the meeting. Hold on 1 second, please.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead. If you don't mind starting with your name first, that'd be great.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Snyder, Council President Lube, and members of the council. My name is Sam Cho. I'm the Public Policy Manager for Lyft in the Pacific Northwest region. First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify in tonight's public hearing. I also want to take a moment to thank City Planner Dave Roth for taking the time to listen to our thoughts about this ordinance and for accepting, as I understand it, some of our suggested improvements based on our experiences in other cities. Although we weren't part of the initial drafting of this ordinance, we believe the version you will be considering tonight is far better than the ones adopted by other cities in the area, like Gresham. And I'll take a moment to explain what the differences are. Our data indicates that the 50-cent fee that you will be collecting in Tigard will be in excess of what will be needed to administer the ordinance, even after paying Portland's 15%. Therefore, Lyft provided the city with 2 recommendations for where those surplus funds would be best utilized. Back in June of last year, Lyft announced an aggressive goal towards environmental sustainability by committing to converting 100% of our vehicles to electric vehicles by the year 2030. This is not an easy task, and our research shows that one of the greatest challenges to reaching this goal of EV conversion is the lack of charging infrastructure. The changes to the ordinance before you today specifically calls out EV infrastructure programs as an area where any surplus funds collected by the purchase fee can be used. By specifically allocating these funds to this important sustainability effort, Tigard would be the first city in the greater Portland area to do this. But more importantly, you would be setting a precedent for the entire region. In other words, you are leading the way, and Lyft is happy to partner with the city on this great initiative. Secondly, Lyft is committed to providing diverse, equitable, and inclusive transportation options. One of the greatest challenges in this space It's providing wheelchair accessible vehicle services, which is extremely costly. This is why Lyft is also very supportive of the language to add wheelchair accessible vehicle programs to the areas where the per trip fee can be used. We appreciate the city's willingness to listen to our suggestions given our experiences. We look forward to working with the city on how we can partner on both EV infrastructure and wheelchair accessible vehicle programs. Thank you again, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Any members of the council have questions? Okay. Council President Lube.
Yeah, actually, so based on the testimony that you submitted to us, the written testimony, you said, for instance, the proposed data sharing requirements modeled off of Portland's data collection practices are not an appropriate solution for a city of Tigard's market size. And I was wondering what data sharing requirements you were referring to.
Yeah, so essentially, in order for a city like Tigard or Portland to collect the 50-cent fee per trip, they need data per trip, correct? So it's not just a form of, the data you will be collecting is not just the number of trips, but there's other things like the driver's information, personal identifiable information. For a city of Portland that is over 500,000 people, it's appropriate because people have the mechanisms. For a city of Tigard that's closer to a fifth of the size, it is very burdensome.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Newton.
That was one of my questions, but I had another question. Really quickly, thank you, Mr. Cho, for your testimony. I'm wondering, when you're talking about what you think the fee should go towards, I noticed, I'm getting a little confused. I've got two versions of the proposed chapter here. Are you suggesting that be added to the list of other items that could be used for? I have some questions of staff later on the list, but is that what you're suggesting? Thanks.
So, yes. So if you look under the fee portion of the ordinance, it says, as Dave referred to, transportation costs. But I believe that Dave could probably clarify, there's been, since the language has been updated to add a wheelchair accessible vehicle and EV infrastructure programs.
Yeah, I understand that. I was a little concerned because your letter says earmark all excess funds towards two programs. So that's why I was confused. So thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, I would say that's obviously preferred. It would be anything, or any funds that are in excess of what's needed to administer the program.
It sounds like you're just happy it's on the list now, Mr. Cho. Is that accurate?
I'll take it.
Okay. This is what compromise is all about. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Cho? All right. Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Nolup, please put the next caller through.
Hello, this is Anna Richter-Taylor. Can you hear me?
We can, Ms. Richter-Taylor.
Hello. Okay. Hello, Mayor Snyder and members of the council. I'll be very brief. You have my written testimony, and Mr. Chow also spoke to some of the issues. But first, I do want to also reiterate that we appreciate very much working with your city staff. Dave Roth, he was very accessible and amenable to some of our initial concerns, and so appreciate that engagement and hope to continue that going forward, as there still remain some issues of concern around data sharing. And just as we enter into a data sharing agreement, we want to make sure, as I noted in the testimony, that we don't put any unnecessary risks to safety and identification issues for riders or drivers. Also, I think that it's important for the residents of Tigard to know that even though this ordinance, I assume, will pass, that there have not been any unregulated rides happening. So all drivers have already gone through and been regulated and registered through the City of Portland process and system. So I just want to clarify that. So individuals don't think that they've been riding with unregulated or monitored drivers. So basically, you see my testimony. We just would like to continue to work together. We appreciate your addressing the issues that we did have concern about, and if there's ways that we can continue to streamline the process and make it a more enjoyable experience for drivers as well as riders, and meet the needs of the city, we'd like to remain a partner in that going forward.
All right, I'll start with a question of you. This is Jason Snyder, the mayor. I'm particularly curious about that last comment you were making about no trips from unregulated drivers. And I'm assuming you're referring to the Portland regulatory framework. And I guess I just want to test and understand this. So, you're getting a little bit of my experience having been a paramedic and an EMT transporting patients, sometimes very long distances, and sometimes bringing patients back. Like take a patient to Seattle and then somebody needs to be brought back from Seattle to Portland. I've done that before, and it occurs to me that the statement you just made, I just question whether that's really reality and how the system would prevent. Maybe it's because of the Portland regulatory system, but are you telling me that a driver from Wenatchee that brings someone to Portland is not going to be offered a trip for someone that's going from Portland back to Wenatchee?
So, I have to be in full disclosure. I am a contract, I'm in contract with Uber, so I'm not inside the company. So I'd have to get clarification on that, and Mark Williams would probably better answer that. My point in the statement was that already in the metro area, residents who have a ride in Tigard, so are using the app in Tigard, we're only able to get rides from drivers also who had gone through the background and regulatory system that Portland has.
Okay.
Did I say that? Did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean okay. It sounds like to get a definitive answer.
I can find the
Yeah, we need to.
I can find the answer to your first question, but the point of that statement was not relating to globally. It was that rides originating in Tigard already they have been regulated, and all drivers have gone through the same process as any Portland area driver. So that will not change with this ordinance.
Understood. Okay.
Sorry, I jumbled that.
That's okay. Other comments not comments, excuse me, other questions from the council? Okay. Thank you very much for your testimony. And let's see, we'll move on to staff. Actually, I'm sorry, Mr. Nolip, are there any other callers?
Mr. Mayor, I've got the first caller back in the queue. Can I put them through to see if they have additional comments?
Sure.
They dropped off and then came back in, so I just want to make sure they get the opportunity.
Mr.
Sorry, I got dropped. No, I was just rejoining to make sure I wasn't going to be asked another question after the second speaker.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you for doing that, and have a good evening.
Mr. Mayor, at this time, that is all the callers that we have in the queue.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to response to testimony by staff. Mr. Roth?
Okay, so I want to thank both Sam and Anna for showing up tonight to testify in person. I think it's really helpful for council and mayor to hear from them. I think we'll start with Sam's comments. So on the, and I should mention that we did capture the requests from Uber and Lyft and have incorporated much of those requests into the edited version that you have before you was emailed out. So we'll start with Sam's comment on the funding piece. So we added the language to the list of transportation specific service areas. We think that that's an appropriate way to capture the need. And I'll just say from the staff perspective, it's something that we're obviously interested in exploring as vehicle electrification as a potential outcome of this. On the data sharing piece, which is a shared concern between both Lyft and Uber, we responded to a request from Lyft to add in some language on the data sharing piece. The specific language added is pursuant to applicable data sharing agreement. And what that means is that if the ordinance is adopted, we would sit down and set up a third-party shared data agreement between PBOT and each of the TNC companies to make sure that that sensitive data is kept safely and is there's not a risk of that data going out. I will say that you know, while a city of our size right now today may not have the full capability of maximizing the use of this data, in the future it could be really valuable for our transportation planning efforts as we grow and become more sophisticated. So that's how I'd respond to that comment. In terms of the fee being beyond what is needed for administration, I'll just say that the fee is consistent with the Portland metro region, and it's lower than other areas, including the Port of Portland, which charges $2 per trip for using the PDX airport. And then the last point, I think, actually, if I could speak about the funding piece, I might actually hand over the funding question to Toby if Toby's available. One of the questions was around how the city would track these new funds coming in. Maybe Toby can help respond to that.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director. And I just wanted to clarify one of Dave's statements, Mr. Roth's statements earlier during the presentation. Until we know how much revenue this is going to generate, the plan is at this point, since the revenue would be used for public safety, transportation planning, transportation engineering, capital improvements, and code enforcement, those costs currently exist in the city's gas tax fund and general fund. So what we would be doing is we'd be tracking the revenue as a separate revenue line and a separate revenue account within those funds, so we can track it and keep it separate. If it generates significant revenue, then yes, we would definitely consider setting up a separate fund, and we could do that during the budget process. At this point in time, that isn't the plan. As right now, we don't know if it's enough for revenue to justify having its own fund. So we could honor the code as currently written by tracking it separately as a separate revenue account within an existing fund.
Thank you, Mr. LaFrance.
Absolutely.
Mr. Roth, is there further response to testimony, or are you done with that? You're muted, Mr. Roth.
Thank you. I would say that I'm done. I think I touched on most of the points that were raised in the public testimony.
Okay. Any further questions of staff? Otherwise, I'm going to close the public hearing. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, perhaps just one question, and Director LaFrance, when you say significant amount could potentially warrant its own, is there a dollar in which that would be signified, or, and if not, that's okay too. I'm just curious what significant means.
We don't have a formal, thank you for asking the question, Councillor Shaw. We don't have a formal policy on that. That said, I'd want to see at least 6 digits annually before we would even consider setting up it's a separate fund.
Councillor Newton, is that a new hand or is that your old hand?
It's a new hand.
Okay, Councillor Newton.
Yeah, really quick. Hey, thank you, Mr. Roth. So my understanding is the fee that we're establishing, the 50 cents, is really driven more by consistency and not what we know is not what we think it will cost to administer the program. Is that correct? Consistency with what other surrounding areas are charging?
I would say that's an accurate characterization, that we're trying to be consistent as possible with the Portland program.
Okay. So at this point, we're not really sure what our administrative costs will be. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then my other question, just so I'm clear, sounds like if this goes through tonight, we're still going to be doing an IGA with Portland. And we still need to do this, what was it called? The data sharing agreement. Is that correct? Okay, thanks.
That's correct, yeah. Verbal correct, yeah.
All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. I want to make sure everyone is considering the draft that Senior Planner Roth sent out earlier today, I believe. There are edits to that, and I want to make sure that any motion hopefully reflects those changes. Is that correct, Mr. Roth, that that's the right version we should be looking at, is the one you emailed today?
That's correct. The one that went out this afternoon has the changes requested by Uber and Lyft.
Okay. So let's make sure the entire council has that correct version. It's got highlighted changes in yellow, I believe, sent out this afternoon. And any motion hopefully will include those changes if people agree with them. So time for discussion. Who would like to speak? Councillor Goodhouse.
Yes, the only thing, and I'm trying to see if I can look at it a different way, but when I looked at that, I didn't have any highlighted areas to see the changed areas on that document. So mine didn't come highlighted, but maybe it's because the source I'm looking at it on. So I'm trying to send it to a different source to see if I can fix that problem.
I think
the first
should be
yellow highlight appears on the second page in the second paragraph near the end. So once you see it, that would be where to see the first highlighting. And it's about wheelchair accessible vehicles and electric vehicles. Mr. Roth, were you trying to speak about that?
Sorry, it's also underlined, Councillor Goodhouse. I don't know if you can see the underlying.
I just sent it to my work computer, so I can see the highlights there. So on this source of my phone, I couldn't see the highlights, so I just sent it there, and I'll take a quick look. But I already looked through the document already, but I'll relook at the highlighted area.
All right. Do you have any other comments at this time? All right. Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I did receive the highlighted document, so thank you very much. I do want to I do appreciate the fact that the TNCs are available, because those of us who may not be on transit lines or near readily available transit options, it's nice to have that opportunity. I think the public safety is obviously very important, and ensuring that we have traffic management is important. I do also appreciate the fact, recognizing that both Lyft and Uber have worked closely with Mr. Roth, and putting together ends up being a compromise, but also something that eventually gets us to some sort of green transportation, GHG emission reduction. So recognizing that, that would be my comments. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Council President Lube.
My only comments are that I appreciate incorporating the changes, and I approve of the changes in the new draft.
Youth Councillor Calderon.
I would agree. I like the addition of the electric vehicle infrastructure. I feel like that'll be a probably big part of our future as a city for transportation. So I bet that'll be very helpful, and it's a good provision to add, so I'm supportive.
Councillor Newton.
I don't have any additional comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for Lyft and Uber for being involved in trying to come up with some compromises. Thanks.
Is there a motion?
I can attempt to make the motion, Mayor. Just want to make sure I highlight the changes that were made. So perhaps I move to approve ordinance number 2107 with the discussed changes that were highlighted within the email we received to TNC Policy Code 5.24.
Awesome.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? City Recorder, please read the number and title of the ordinance.
Ordinance number 21-07, an ordinance adopting Tigard Municipal Code Chapter 5.24 related to Transportation Network Company TNC policy with the highlighted changes.
And a roll call vote.
Councillor Goodhouse.
Yes.
Councillor Newton.
Yes.
Council President Lube.
Yes.
Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Mayor Snyder.
Yes. All right, ordinance number 21-07 is adopted unanimously. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Uber and Lyft, and thank you, council, for a thoughtful discussion and dialogue on that. Appreciate it. And we'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is a legislative public hearing considering an ordinance allowing payment plans of longer than 1 year for Tigard utility customers during the COVID-19 emergency. I'm going to open the public hearing. Anyone that wishes to testify may do so by phone by calling and getting in the queue now. The phone number to call is 503-966-4101. Again, 503-966-4101, and we'll take your testimony in a bit. Next item is staff report. Director LaFrance.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Toby LaFrance, Finance and Information Services Director for the City of Tigard. And I'm here tonight to continue our discussion of help to Tigard utility customers. Over the last year, and in honor and embracing the city's strategic planning priority number 1 to set the standard for excellence in public service and customer experience, the City of Tigard has been providing help to Tigard businesses and residents through the Utility Billing Tigard Aid program. According to Resolution 20-50, that aid was extended to June 30th. And one of the provisions of that aid, which has been that we have suspended turning off water for non-payment, and we've also suspended late payments or fees for late payments. That is set to end on April 1st. The rationale at the time that Resolution 20-50 was passed was to make sure that we still had an aid program in place to help those customers who are in imminent danger of having their utilities shut off due to non-payment, and to provide time to get them into the right program so that they can continue to receive Tigard utilities. As part of that plan, we've been working on a communications plan, and Tigard staff will be contacting via phone the customers that are currently past due. The number of customers that are currently past due is about 550 customers, or about 3% of the total customers within the Tigard water service area. When we were doing our communications plan and we were getting into the details and we were looking at the number of customers and how far past due several of them are, and over 20% are over $1,000 at this point in time, we wanted to make sure that we could have payment plans that would lead to successful payment of past due dollar amounts if they do not qualify for one of our Tigard aid programs. And one of the things that we saw as blocking the ability is in Tigard code, we currently have a limit that payment plans cannot exceed 12 months. And if you have somebody that's already about a year past due, and we're trying to squeeze 12 months worth of late payments over a 12-month period, we have effectively doubled their utility bill, and that's likely not to lead to a successful payment program. So what we've decided to do is come to you this evening with the ordinance that's in front of you. That would temporarily provide myself and my designees the ability to provide payment plans that exceed 12 months. We would have the ability to do this up to 6 months after our emergency ordinances due to COVID expire. So that should give us ample time to provide payment plans for our utility billing customers and help them get their accounts current. So that's what's before you this evening, and staff is recommending approval of the ordinance in front of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Mr. LaFrance? Councillor Goodhouse.
One quick question, Director LaFrance. Why you mentioned there's what 400 people that do not qualify for the aid? What are some of the reasons why they're not qualifying? Were they past due prior to when the program was in place, or what qualifications did they not meet that are putting them in a situation that they don't qualify and they need to be on a payment plan?
Sorry, I must have misspoken. I don't have any data on customers who won't qualify for aid. What we do know is that we have roughly 550 customers that are currently more than 60 days past due. And so these are the customers that we're concerned about, customers that would be essentially scheduled for shutoff if we started shutoffs today. And so what we want to do is when April 1 rolls around and we start doing shutoffs for non-payment, hopefully in the next month, we can contact customers and we don't even get to that point, because we can get as many of those 550 customers that qualify for aid into an aid program and help take care of their past due amounts. We do suspect there'll be customers that don't qualify. And for those customers, we would need to set up payment plans. And so that's the ordinance in front of you this evening, would let us set up more flexible payment plans than we can currently do today under our existing ordinance.
So these people then are ones that for some reason don't know about the aid program, or we haven't been able to get in touch with them and they're just past due, but not realizing that they could call and either get that taken care of or not. So we're still trying to work on that communication gap.
Exactly.
Okay.
Council President Lube.
Thank you, Mr. LaFrance. I just have a question regarding your anticipation of, negotiating the payment plans. Will I assume, well, I guess I don't want to assume, I guess I'm going to question, are you going to be engaging in discussion with, these customers on what they feel is reasonable? Is there a maximum amount of time you're going to be willing to have this over?
Yeah, so we have not finalized the structure. The structure that we are looking at currently takes a 3-tiered approach that takes amount of time that they're in arrears and total dollar figure that is past due. So an example, our current thinking would be that we could go up to, first tier would be we could go up to 3 times the number of months that they're in arrears. So if somebody's only 60 days past due, only 2 months in arrears, we could make a payment plan over a 6-month time frame. If they're further behind than just 2 months, if they're further behind, then we could go up to 2 years to make payment arrangements total. So for example, if somebody say is 10 months in arrears, the current thinking is that we'd rather not go up to 30 months, which that first tier would allow. And so we'd like to try and get them in within up to a 24-month period. However, we also want to have a dollar threshold. And let's say if getting them in under 24 months exceeds that threshold, and we're considering somewhere around $100 or maybe a % of total bill amount, something along those lines. This is one of the areas we still need to refine. If by only going to 2 years we exceed that dollar amount, then we could potentially go up to 3 years to try and make sure that they're able to make payments and eventually get themselves current.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. LaFrance, I think I understand this, or I thought I did, but in the AIS, it talks about extending it 6 months after our emergency expires. You're meaning the ability for you to negotiate, right? Is 6 months? Just
Correct.
making sure I understand it. Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to public testimony. I don't believe we received any written public testimony. City Recorder Krager, can you confirm that?
That's correct. We received none.
Mr. Nolup, do we have any callers in the queue?
Mr. Mayor, there are no callers in the queue.
All right. No response to testimony by staff, I take it. I will close the public hearing. Council consideration of ordinance number 21-08.
I'll move to approve ordinance number 21-08.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All right,
I just want to thank, real quick, Mr. Mayor, I just want to thank the team for bringing this forward. It's really important that we make sure that we can get our community through the impacts of COVID. So I appreciate you keeping your eye on that, and thanks for bringing it forward.
Yeah, we're really having to be, I think, very flexible and think in flexible ways. So I appreciate that. Let's see. City Recorder, read the number and title of the ordinance, please.
Ordinance number 21-08. An ordinance allowing payment plans of longer than 1 year for Tigard utility customers during the COVID-19 emergency.
And a roll call vote.
Councillor Goodhouse.
Yes.
Councillor Newton.
Yes.
Council President Lube.
Yes.
Councillor Shaw.
Yes.
Mayor Snyder.
Yes. Okay, ordinance number 21-08 is adopted unanimously. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Appreciate the work. We have no non-agenda items. Mr. City Manager Reimer, administrative report.
Well, good evening again, Mayor and councilors, as well as my teammates and community members that may be on the meeting today. I want to start by thanking and giving kudos to over 1,000 community members for registering for our Code Red emergency notification system in the month of February alone. And so obviously the efforts and the council's expectation that we continue to grow the number of community members on that was a success. It was really a success because of a number of teammates that came together. And I just want to highlight a few of them, if you wouldn't mind. First, Stephanie in police. So she literally went door to door, encouraging community members to sign up for Code Red. And then Marissa and Mike in Public Works worked closely with numerous community members that called in and needed to be walked through how to do it or questions they may have about the data, et cetera. So kudos to them. And then Kent in Design and Communications came forward with a special edition of Cityscape that focused only on Code Red. And then finally, Karen and Christina are building upon that. And we just published in yesterday's Tigard Life an ad focused on Code Red. And so, as you can see, the number of resources we poured forward in this important venture, but at the same time, it's important for the community to understand it's a priority, and it's important that we all do try to get signed up. And so we'll continue those efforts, but 1,000 in 1 month is a pretty amazing number. And so hopefully we can continue to see that month over month, and we'll continue advertising. And also thanks to many of you that use your social media platforms to help encourage community members. We appreciate that and believe that is part of the success as well. Just a couple things on our COVID updates. We'll probably be giving these more and more frequently again. Thanks to Toby and team for bringing forward the item that you just agreed with. So we are continuing to talk about a slow and intentional reopening. And the first two things that we're looking at is starting next Monday, which is March 8th, the reopening of the utility drop box. So that's been closed for a number of months. And then in mid-April, a date still to be determined, looking at resuming some in-person court in person again. And so we're working through the details of that, but we just wanted to give you and the community notice that sometime in mid-April, we plan to resume some of our court operations. And as you might suspect, there's many things that the team's working on to make sure that's a safe environment for our team, as well as the community that will be entering one of our facilities. Seems like as we do every week, we want to celebrate some of the great things that our creative library teammates are doing. And so a few more things for March that are happening. First will be our annual magazine giveaway that'll come up here. It started yesterday, in fact, where individuals can pick up 10 to 15 magazines from 2019 in all different information and specialties. And so just a great way to reuse some of our material and get them in the hands of our community. I know today my granddaughter was using old magazines to practice cutting up. So there's all different things that we can do with the magazines. We also have our stuffed animal sleepaway camp starting. We'll be back, and so beginning on March 15th, families can stop by and pick up a take and make bag that'll be packed with a variety of surprises that the family can enjoy together, and then have a sleepover with one of their favorite stuffed animal friends for that evening. So just another great way of keeping our families entertained and together. And great thanks to our creative library team for their efforts and just making sure that things that we've done in the past, we're finding new ways to do them during this time of COVID. We're really looking for the community's voice in many things. And so just encourage people to continue to look at our Engage Tigard page. As all of you know, there's many different great things on there. But there's two things right now that I want to highlight. One is we have started the reimagining our website, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. And the first step is getting the community's input on what they would like to see in the city's website and how it will be a more useful tool for them. And so I encourage our community to go there. And the second one is getting input on our community campus development, known as our CFC, and getting input as well from our community on ideas that they may have as we continue to have this community conversation over the course of 2021. And then last, today is Brenda Annis's last day. She's been with us for 22 years. And so we just want to say thank you very much to Brenda for her work primarily in courts. And we thank her for her efforts and for just making Tigard a better place to work and a better community to be. And we know she's been a big part of that for the last 22 years. So thank you again to Brenda. We wish her all the best in the next adventure of her life. And that concludes my report for this evening. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, City Manager Reimer. I believe the next item on the agenda is an executive session. Tigard City Council will go into executive session to discuss hiring an officer or employee under ORS 192.660 subsection 2A. All discussions are confidential and those present may disclose nothing from the session. Representatives of the news media are allowed to attend executive sessions as provided by ORS 192.660 subsection 4, but must not disclose any information discussed. No executive session may be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decision. Executive sessions are closed to the public. The council will adjourn directly from the executive session. Good night, Tigard.
Good night.